Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to be learning about adult learners and lots of things that factor into understanding an adult learner. And the first one I want to make sure that we all understand is the motivation. What motivates us to do things? And that can vary with different psychological approaches and motivational factors and age and so on and so forth. But motivation is best defined as the level of effort an individual is willing to expend toward the achievement of a certain goal. Over to the left, you'll see I have three psychological viewpoints toward motivation. The first one listed is the behaviorist view, and I'm sure many of you recognize B.F. Skinner. He's a well known behavioral psychologist. But for today, we're just going to look at his theory on motivation, and he describes the process of increasing the desired behavior by either using positive consequences or the avoidance of negative stimuli as an extrinsic. That's something, remember, extrinsic form of communication. We're going to talk about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in a moment, but his views and theories revolve around extrinsic motivating factors. Next, we have a cognitivist view, and that emphasizes intrinsic motivation in creating situations where students are stimulated to see answers. Lastly, humanistic view. Can't have gone through education without knowing a little bit about Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And he believes and states that if students have their basic needs met, physical and safety, their needs for belongingness, self esteem, and self actualization will intrinsically motivate them to achieve goals they want to reach. Um, and so if you remember his hierarchy of needs, we've got the basic needs at the bottom. In order to move up, those needs need to be met as somebody goes up through the hierarchy. Over to the right, you'll see extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is defined as motivation to participate in an activity based on meeting an external goal or external reward, garnering praise or approval, winning a competition, or receiving an award or payment. Example in education would be a college degree, enhancement in your career, grades, fear of failure, money, and pleasing the teacher. I listed there. This is mostly seen, I believe, in the research too, in K to 12 students and under the theory philosophy known as pedagogy. Next, below that, we have intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation um, is created and done because it is inherently interesting and enjoyable. Example, I was successful because I put a lot of work into it. These students strive to understand the material rather than just memorizing it. And we are going to see this, you're going to see this today a lot in characteristics of an adult learner is that intrinsic motivation. So, oh, I went ahead just a little too far. So next we have a child learner versus an adult learner, and thought a lot about adult learner and what is an adult learner. How do we know they're an adult learner? What makes them an adult learner? And it can't just be they're 18 years old, because that is when we legally say somebody is an adult. Um, so what I found online, and this really helped me to understand that we really can't connect it to age. It's far more situational. An adult learner is an adult is defined as someone who has taken on adult roles in society. This could be a 16-year-old mom. We will discuss the term andragogy later, but it's very important, especially in today's lecture, because I want to point out, for the sake of this lecture, that adult learners are not just simply 18-year-olds. They are those who have performed socially productive roles and have assumed primary responsibility for their own lives. We ask ourselves, when does this happen? And it's not just at a certain age. So I would say that in my master's program, I would qualify under an adult learner, but I don't know in my undergraduate if I would have characteristics necessarily of an adult learner. Now, so characteristics of a child learner versus an adult learner, and you'll see there's a chart there comparing sort of the two. But the first one, we have reliant on others for importance of material being learned, whereas an adult learner is deciding for themselves the importance of material. They're far more self-motivated. Child learners accept information at face value, where adult learners are more likely to need validation of the information. Child learners have very limited experiences in life to bring to their learning, where adult learners have far more life experiences. Child learners expect learning to be useful in the future. Well, this will help me someday because, whereas adult learners expect learning to be immediately useful. I am learning this because I know that this is going to help me with my classroom management. And lastly, child learners little influence or resource to teacher and peers, and then adults serve as a resource for teacher or facilitator and peers. So, what does the research tell us? Now, I have this in chronological order because I thought that made the most sense. But the first person we're going to talk about on the very left there is Malcolm Knowles, and he's the one we're going to focus on for today's lecture. But 1984, he coined the term andragogy. Now, andragogy is, he believes, or he stated that adults learn differently than children, and it includes methodologies of how to teach adults. They require different instructional strategies. Part of his theory is that adults need to know why. They want material to be relevant, and they don't like being talked down to. Instruction should promote self-direction and provide guidance. That's a huge component of this. It's the role of the teacher. In pedagogical model, the teacher is the source of all wisdom, but teaching adults, teachers become more of a guide. Next one I have over is McArcher. That's what we're going to go with. In 2004, Dorothy McArcher, actually. I like this one a lot. I think this one's really interesting and very important. Teaching professionals, educators, must be aware of adult learners' preferred learning strategies for learning. She also explored factors that affect and influence adult learning styles or serve as barriers, and that's what we're going to focus on for this. These barriers include situational barriers, personal challenges, home, family, children, lack of affordable childcare, and so on and so forth. And again, these are things that we need to be mindful of when we're educating adults. Institutional barriers, issues of providing financial support to learners in order to pay for tuition, resources needed for learning activities, or a general lack of support services at times, places suitable to adult learners. Dispositional barriers includes low self-esteem, negative attitude about being an adult learner. For instance, being too old, too busy, too tired, too sick, not smart enough, I don't need any more education, and so on and so forth. But this, today I really want to focus on academic barriers and pedagogical barriers. So academic barriers are things like literacy or computer-related skills, limited access to resources, or academic skills that aren't mastered in childhood and adolescence stay with you. Most important, the pedagogical barriers that this woman came up with, and are largely based on a lack of understanding on the part of the instructor. Facilitators and administrators learning about how adults learn, the benefits of learner-centered teaching and active learning, diversity among adult learners in terms of their their learning style and preferred type of learning activities, and adult learners' need for relevancy and content, recognition of prior learning, and respect for others. Lastly, Machira, the next one in 2017, found utilizing self-assessment provides advantages when working with students in higher education institutions. Machira indicated that outcomes elevate when feedback is provided. Adult learners see the value in self-assessments and peer assessments. The process engages students to become part of the learning process. And the last one is Suffermansia, 2019, found that adults have a desire, a capacity, intention, and requirements to learn because of the importance for learning to their own career or self. Therefore, andragogy is important in higher education regarding providing autonomy in learning. His findings led to the suggestions for teaching. For example, online courses must be structured so that they are easy to navigate and communication is clear. Further recommendations from this include create an environment that engages learners, provide discussion boards, group projects, interactions, and things like that. Now, that was what does the research tell us. So this is about what does the data tell us. And so the data tells us that 40% of the student population are 25 and older. Again, 40%, 25 and older. I was shocked by that number. To the right there, you see a pie chart. I included this because it's dealing with percentage of adult recall in the learning process. And so, where are adults best at recall? And this shows that 70% of adults were able to recall information more adequately when involved directly in the learning process and or their experience had purpose. That's the largest part there. 20% recall well after only seeing material and 10% only after listening. The last one there, the bar graph rather for data number 3 pointing downward is learners who prefer self-directed and independent learning by generation. This is generational, and you can see it goes up. So what do we see here? We start with the boomers. Boomers preferred self-directed and independent learning only at 33%, the same number for Gen X. But as we move up, we see the number increase to 42% for millennials, and our most recent generation, our Gen Z population, getting upwards of 43% preferring that independent learning. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the difference between andragogy and pedagogy. So again, Malcolm Knowles and his theory is that learning programs must support the notion that adults are self-driven, take responsibility for decisions, and learning must be relevant to their lives. Pedagogy, the art and science professional of teaching, and far more connected to child learners. What is the difference? Andragogy refers to the methods and approaches used in adult education and is directed towards self actualization, gaining experience, and problem solving. Pedagogy is an education system in which the learner depends on the teacher for guidance, evaluation, and knowledge acquisition. Neither, this is important too, is a teaching technique, but rather a philosophy that a teacher looks to for guidance. And I have sort of a comparison of the two. So starting with the first one, dependence. So with this philosophy, the andragogy teaching philosophy is focus that adults are independent and desire to be self-directed in their learning. So the teacher takes on more of a role of a facilitator, where in the pedagogy, we have children are dependent on the teacher to facilitate and structure, so more teacher controlled. Next down, we're looking at motivation. Adults gain motivation internally. They're more self-motivated and self-directed, where children or pedagogy looks more at children gaining motivation through external sources. The learner focus, we have problem-centered / real world. So adult learning is focused more on real life connections, where pedagogy approaches children learning is subject matter focused. And lastly, sort of the learning reasons, focus on the process versus focusing on the assessment. I told you we're going to come back to Malcolm Knowles. So Malcolm Knowles outlined 6 assumptions in the andragogy learning theory. The first one that we can assume of an adult learner is adult learners have self-concept. This means they are autonomous, independent, and self-directed. Simply put, learning at their own pace in their own way. Adults can choose what they will learn to a degree, when they will learn it, and how they will learn it. Learning from experience. Adults learn from their previous experiences and can contribute richness to discussions. Readiness to learn depends on need and purpose. Whether or not an adult is ready to learn depends on what they need to know in order to deal with life situations. Immediate applications, immediately useful. As I mentioned that before, adults are life focused, problem centric. Internally motivated, adults are motivated by internal factors rather than external. Adults put in the time and effort because they internalize their own motivation. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some extrinsic motivation with adult learning as well. And then lastly, need to know. Adult learners need to know the value in what they are learning and the whys behind it. I added these in, and we don't have time to go over them right now, but they are really interesting. And it's just flipped, these charts here. So we have the pedagogy and the andragogy flipped versus how I had presented them. But I really want to kind of look at this one here, but this is interesting. These are design elements. And when you have the time, go back and take a look at this. And we have, for example, activities, design elements, activities on pedagogy are transmittable techniques, right? We're talking lectures, delivering the information versus experiential techniques like hands-on learning, evaluation by the teacher versus more of a self-assessment. And lastly, I wanted to really kind of tie this all together, and why are we learning this? And what we want to learn is how to be a good educator to adult learners. And I came up with 12 strategies. There's so much information out there, but these were pretty good. And I hopefully you're able to connect these to what we had talked about earlier and some of the research and theories and philosophies surrounding adult learners. Keep your lessons relevant. Break up content to avoid overload. Keep everyone involved and engaged. Get to know those students. Be mindful of different learning styles. Create a comfortable learning environment. Provide opportunities to practice. Provide visually stimulating material. Foster independence and autonomy in your lessons. Encourage questions and discussions among your students. Provide feedback, relevant feedback, and be flexible and passionate. Okay, that is all. Thank you.